Joseph DeLong is the founder of Astaria, a recently created NFT lending protocol, and the former CTO of SushiSwap, one of the biggest decentralized exchanges. Joseph is heavily involved in building and managing DAOs. He recently wrote a Twitter thread satirizing how it would be to run a lemonade stand through a DAO. With the recent controversial proposals surfacing on MakerDAO and Lido, we're once again reminded of the importance of DAO governance. We begin the discussion by talking about Joseph's Lemonade Stand DAO and reflect on some of the DAO experiments that have happened over the last couple of years.
This Lemonade Stand run by Little Jimmy, and there are 1,000 token holders of this Lemonade Stand, and he has a profit margin of 80% on the lemonade. And it's just kind of all the random things that happen in a DAO that are trying to influence the product, and much of those are around these absurd tokenomics, and then secondarily it's around product features and roadmap, which is difficult. And so for me, this is more of an explanation about DAOs that are building products. So MakerDAO would be an example. Sushi, that are making products. I don't really see any. I really don't see any major problems with ones that are doing investments as a collective. Those seem to actually go really well. Just a good way to pool money. And maybe it's just the user is generally going to be more sophisticated. But the ones that are building products, it's really problematic because you have kind of so many cooks in the kitchen, and the focus, the reason that corporations don't hire, or the reason corporations don't just take the advice of every stock A or every Class A, stock holders opinion, is because that's impossible. What they do is they hire a management team. They hire the management team, and then they build the product together. And if they do a bad job, they get fired, right? And in DAOs, it's kind of this kind of weird volunteerism mixed with, token valuations. It's insane. I think most of it's insane, especially VE token models. I think long term, what we'll see is a drift away from tokens. I think what we'll see is people making normal equity companies. Yeah.
Can you explain a bit more? What are VE tokens, and how have they been kind of implemented in DAOs, and why do you think the space will move away from tokens in general?
Yeah, VE tokens are this kind of I provide an asset for the DAO to use as an investment, and then I get this VE token that's my claim on the underlying assets that's non-transferable. And this is that same madness that started I'll go point out SafeMoon. This is kind of in that same realm of tweaking the tokenomics in such a way that kind of that gives it magical properties so that people can't transfer. Well, we saw that with Ethereum too, right? The Ethereum 2 has been non-transferable, but Lido and Rocket Pool exist. And if that's the case, then how come it's non-transferable? It's people just naturally take riskier positions because they don't hold the thing. They use an intermediary. So and VE tokens in particular was just kind of something, an asset that I can't sell onto the open market, and so therefore it's going to be valuable. Just that sort of stuff just kind of bugs me. But generally, I just say DAOs are kind of a collection of people that are trying to accomplish a goal, and if that goal is building a product, it's very difficult to do inside a DAO.
Okay, so there's kind of the question of like whether this VE token model where you're kind of placed like staking tokens in a DAO so that you're kind of linked to the DAO like long term, because the idea is that you can't withdraw these tokens after kind of a certain period of time has expired. So that's one aspect of it. But I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that you think DAOs will move away from tokens in general. Is that true? I mean, and how can that...
Oh, no, not DAOs. I think
okay.
people who building products. I think people building products will move away from the DAO model. I think that's just like... here's an example, right? Is I was doing, working in a DAO before, and I was basically making a salary to do that. But talent, like myself or like any of the other people who work at like a lot of these DAOs, is valuable. And DAOs aren't really necessarily treating talent valuable. And so what they do, and this happened in a lot of the DAOs I've been in, they kind of just break off and kind of like start working on like side projects, or they get poached by, other startups, or they just leave and start their own startup, which is what, I did.
So do you think DAOs will be mostly used for, to pool money together and invest? Will they serve as like mainly investment clubs, I guess, or like decentralized or semi-decentralized VCs? But it seems like you don't think they can be a viable alternative to companies, to corporations.
I don't think so. I think if we do, there has to be an understood hierarchy and governance process for installing and removing that hierarchy. I think like a lot of the DAOs, because they start not knowing that they'll be successful, because people are just running experiments. And like, I don't want to bash any of this like experimentation either, because I think that that's like really valuable for the ecosystem. But like, they have these imperfect births most of the time. And then because of that, they're not allowed to have explicit hierarchy. And when you have explicit hierarchy, you have like kind of like a transparent system for how the hierarchy works. But the counterpoint that I think a lot of people want to believe is that if we don't install a hierarchy, that there is no hierarchy. But there's this this short story written by a feminist called The Tyranny of Tyranny of Leaderlessness? Tyranny of I'll have to remember the title. Anyway, but the point of that story was that when there's having no hierarchy doesn't create no hierarchy. Having no hierarchy creates an opaque hierarchy, and so I don't know who I'm responsible to, who is calling like some of the product direction, etc.
It's I saw this the Tyranny of Structurelessness.
Tyranny of Structurelessness. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was in the talk I did in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To swap crypto, a user has to choose among hundreds of DEXs on multiple networks, all offering different rates and fees. Do you want to avoid that hassle? Swap on 1inch, a DEX aggregator built to get you better rates than any single DEX. Enjoy unlimited liquidity across multiple networks and top-level security. Get 1inch on your phone now or swap on 1inch.io. The Tyranny of Structurelessness explains how leadership and power can be seized when left in a void. We go on to speak about the different factors involved in forming hierarchies within DAOs and how individuals assume leadership positions. Joseph also shares insights into his experience at SushiSwap and the difficulties he had encountered as a CTO.
So on December 27th, I was working part-time at Dapper Labs on the Flow protocol. I had come from ETH2 research. I'd done that for about 2 years, ETH research and like implementation. And then I was working at Dapper Labs, and Maki, who I'd known from like DeFi Summer, called me and asked me if I wanted to be CTO. And it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting, because I thought Sushi was a really like fun experiment at that time. You know, I had some like tokens, like, you know, not very many, but I had some. And I said, yeah, okay, then I'm interested. And so I thought, and I talked to my wife about it, and she said I should go for it, which was like actually shocked me, because she generally is, you know, like pretty conservative, and like trying to work at like a thing that doesn't, like a thing that isn't a thing, is difficult. And so then I said, okay, I called them back and said, okay, it has to be CTO because it's going to be, you know, beneficial for my career. None of this like kind of like made up role kind of stuff. Head chef of blah 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 something, right? He agreed, and they wrote up like a proposal, and that proposal passed on January 5th. And then I was helping kind of like build out products and roll out products and manage a team and like work on, you know, technical architecture.
And then what happened that you left? And, you know, like I know that this was very much tied to just like how DAOs are structured, and I just like from the talks you've given since, it seems like that was a big part of why in the end you decided to leave.
Yeah, the team was fighting a lot. There was this like continuous infighting. The ability to build anything, which was the whole reason that I was there, was to build something interesting, became diminished and almost eliminated. And so I just said, you know, this isn't for me anymore. Like we would have these kind of like long group calls that would just lead to nothing. It would just be everybody yelling over everyone. It's like insanity. And I've experienced this not just like only at Sushi, right? I've experienced this at other places that are like, we're, you know, decentralized. There's no hierarchy. It becomes I came from like, you know, the Fortune 500 world. I was working at a bank, you know. It's like, if you want to go for like the polar opposite, you know, it's that. And I always kind of like anticipated like the goodness in people was the reason that, you know, things like banks and DAOs themselves like would be like somewhat functional, because there was like a limit to the level of you know, human cruelty. But I found out the opposite, that there's kind of no limit to the level of human cruelty, and that makes DAOs really impossible in my view without kind of like some sort of structure. But yeah, so there we were like fighting a bunch, and I was like, you know, I could feel it that Trident was never going to ship at this rate. We would have to kind of have we'd have to offboard a bunch of the team. We would have to onboard a bunch of new team members. And I didn't have explicit power to fire, but I only had some explicit power to hire. And so I just figured I would go take a break, and then found my own company, which is what I did. I took a month vacation, went to Hawaii, went to like Dubai, went like everywhere, and then started Astaria.
So what are kind of the main lessons that you took from Sushi and are now implementing in Astaria?
Yeah, explicit hierarchy is a big one, like kind of how everything is laid out. What else is there? Well, I'll tell you one thing. Building is a lot faster. I feel like I'm on, you know, super speed with a team, with like a close-knit team. Another thing that I learned that is probably not necessarily related to DAOs, but was premature scaling. I think Sushi was definitely premature scaling the team. We were at like, I think at the top, we were at like 24, 26 like team members, and like 18 of those were developers. And like fast, small, effective teams are a lot better. Counterparty risk, like no kind of like where the control for the thing you're holding is like kind of like what the Bitcoiners always say is like not your keys, not your Bitcoin, something like that. Not your ownership, not your GitHub, not your keys, not your multi-sig, etc.
So do you mean like team members should have ownership over the thing they're creating? Like there should be like accountability? Is that what you mean?
Well, it has to be somewhere, right? There has to be ownership of something somewhere. Like somebody has to own a domain name, right? That has to be a legal entity of some kind. So it'd be a person or a company. Someone has to be the admin or the owner for a GitHub repository or GitHub organization. Somebody has to be, so there are all these like touch points that are like touch points of control, and that like wound up being, that winds up being a disaster when things start to unwind. Is like that is where like the literal control rests. I think like one thing that I thought about at Consensus is like Consensus was another one of these like leaderless organizations, and my time working at Consensus was like. But by the way, I love Consensus, but like it was a bit chaotic. And when it's leaderless, the leader, the kind of like this like counterparty risk that I was talking about, like where the control of something actually lies, is like wound up being like financing. So like, can I ask you to write me a check to let me do X or Y or hire a new person or build a new software. And that's where like the explicit control comes from.
And that's, I guess, very much tied to hierarchy, just like having a specific and explicit structure for the team and who's in charge of what and who it responds to whom and so on. So, so I guess, main lessons are having that structure, that hierarchy within the team, having just explicit control, like explicit ownership, scaling gradually or scaling according to the project's growth. I guess like that's a matter of like efficiency as well, What about communication? I wonder if the fact that there are so many kind of contributors in DAOs, and they're sometimes kind of like coming and going, and there isn't kind of this structure. It has to make communication like pretty hard. Different time zones. What kind of lessons did you learn on that?
Totally. I think that communication is a very key one that I didn't touch on at all. So I think like for Astaria, one of the things that we did was we picked like our channels for communication, which is like, for us it's Slack. For another team, it might be something different. Like with, DAOs I've been in, I'll be stretched across, Telegram, Discord, sometimes Signal if somebody like wants to use that. And then like Twitter and Twitter DMs and just like, it kind of makes you kind of all over the place in terms of communication. Like your communication graph is just huge. Picking a venue to communicate. I also think like the way people communicate with each other like is really important, right? Like you, I think we always equate professionalism, to, suit and tie and, well-mannered, not cursing, etc. But I think I have an alternate definition of professionalism, which is this idea that you commit to something, and you hold yourself accountable to that thing that you're supposed to do, as well as like your communication should be, with your team and your coworkers should be like at least polite. Right? Mm-hmm. I think that's really easy to have a polite conversation with them about something, because none of this at the end of the day matters super deeply. I mean, we're all just trying to go home to our families and trying to be, the most successful organization. And so regardless of whether you are feeling one way or the other about the way an organization should go, the conversation should be polite. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't, I'm probably guilty of not always being polite in those instances, but just as a general matter of fact, I think that we should endeavor to be more polite with one another.
Mm, for sure. Where do you think, token holders, have a role in organizations? In DAOs, the way that things have evolved is that there are these instances for governance to give kind of power to investors and users of the thing that you're managing, of the protocol. And I think that's a very just inspiring idea for a future of organizations, just democratizing decision making to the users of Web3. And from what you're saying, it seems like, this makes organizations less efficient. But I wonder if you think that there could still be a role for that.
Yeah, totally. I think governance tokens are critical, but I would say that it is a governance token and not a management token, right? Mm-hmm. So we should use it as a governance to kind of install management, install hierarchy, and remove hierarchy. And the first few proposals should be explicit about that. I also think governance tokens are nice, but there are problems with some of the mechanisms. One of them in particular is yield farming, or what do they call it? Token distribution, staking rewards, etc. This style of token emission is so problematic. The whole design is essentially to get kind of people in the market to be buying the token, to get people using the token, and then now the ability to emit these tokens has some sort of value, right? So in instances of some of these protocols that emit tokens for liquidity, right, it makes sense to do it in a bootstrapping sense, to kind of get people interested in a project and emit some tokens, and then but many of these projects are they're making revenue, but they're not making profit because they're emitting tokens that are far exceeding their revenue in the protocol. And the expectation is that sometime in the future we're going to kind of succeed, and then now all these tokens are going to be worth a lot more, but that's not generally how it works, right? Because we're kind of we're emitting tokens that aren't exceeding revenue, and then we continue to emit and emit and emit until they're completely diluted. And a lot of these teams aren't getting tokens, like a significant portion of their tokens for their work, and just like I was talking about earlier, like talent kind of like flees, right? Mm-hmm. Talent will go where their like talent is respected.
I wanted to let you know about A16C's new podcast called Web3 with A16C. We're excited to recommend what is sure to become one of the best podcasts for understanding and going deeper on crypto and Web3. It's hosted by Sonal Chokshi, former showrunner and longtime host of the A16C podcast, along with frequent guest appearances and hosting by Chris Dixon. This new show is really about building the next generation of the internet. You can listen to Web3 with A16C today on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Be sure to follow it now. One of the biggest challenges DeFi projects face is onboarding users. Typically, users are incentivized through liquidity mining and yield farms. However, in the long term, these mechanisms damage projects as cost of liquidity incentives were far greater compared to their revenue. Joseph goes on to share his thoughts on reward models across different DeFi projects. And I guess like it starts to become like a drug, just like very addictive, right? For these projects, it's like I imagine if you're relying on your users and on liquidity, you're relying on tokens to get that. It must be so hard to stop. But then the problem, like you say, is that you end up diluting your own token, and then it loses value, and then your users will stop wanting these tokens, and then your talent will go away because they're being paid in these tokens. So it's just like a very vicious cycle. Do you think like it seems that whole thing is kind of running its course? Like I do you think that's like yield farming and like liquidity mining? I don't know, like maybe it's because I haven't been kind of like these things like haven't been generating as many headlines, and we haven't been kind of covering them anymore as much, but it seems like they're just like aren't as many. What do you think? Do you think kind of people are realizing that it's just like a bad model, or is it still going on?
I think that's exactly what's happening. I love that you said like addicting, because I said, or like a drug, because I always said that it was habit forming. Like the token emissions are habit forming. Like there is a very specific narrow band of like when you should use it, and I think that is like to get initial flywheel effects for something, and there should be a very short window that it's using, because if you continue to emit like and like your revenue is not even kind of like crossing kind of like the threshold of your token emissions, then you're just paying people to use the platform kind of, and it becomes a shell game, right? So they're just like, it's like you'll see this like with Spell, you'll see that with like Sushi, you'll see this like these some of these like protocols that are like continue to emit. This becomes like a shell game of like where is the actual like value being accrued, and so I completely disagree with this model, and I think people are coming onto that now. The alternative is like, when it first started, and I've like come like 180 degrees on this. I'm like the used to be like the DAO maxi, token maxi kind of person. But if you looked at like Yearn was really successful because they had a really great product, right? And then Sushi was successful, I think, partially because they borrowed a really great product. And then kind of like after those two really good use cases, the staking rewards, I think the notion that people had about staking rewards was that, this is a good and useful mechanic to kind of like get uptake on your system. And just like they became so broadly adopted and so abused that, and then also like kind of like the mechanized farmers who would farm, specifically, it became so abused that it was like it's a completely irrelevant stat. And like another thing to think about is like the staking reward should be somebody providing you a service, right? In the case of like sushi or whatever, it was like, you know, people who are providing liquidity, right? Or in the case of like Uni, it was like, you know, people who were like early users, right? They got airdrop. But it should be like somebody who's like providing you something, because you're kind of giving away, you know, something of value. And so, yeah, I think people are just like totally drifted from this. You look at Gem, you look at Genie, you know, those were two, you know, equity acquisitions. I know Genie had a token, but, you know, they're like wound up being, you know, an equity deal essentially. And you look at OpenSea, who's like never issued a token. I think that it's clear that if you have a winning product that's generating revenue, is a real business, why would I give that away, right? Yeah.
It was interesting to see that that Uniswap is, you know, they when they bought Genie, they announced these rewards in USDC. Yeah. I thought that was very curious. Do you see that as kind of a new model emerging? Like, why not give away like protocol tokens, like native tokens?
Well, I think Uniswap Labs is one. That's one thing that like I aspire to model like Astaria after. Is their model was very good. I would say, kind of with the exception of the Uni token, their design was kind of like they did this. They kind of did this airdrop for Genie token holders that was in USDC. I think that was kind of brilliant. Because there's like, once a token has become emitted, there's nothing you can do. Like creating a merger requires you to make like a contract that you can kind of like redeem for. You have to have people like swap for the original token, and then you have to have them actually do it, right? And you can't force anybody to do anything. And so I think that airdrop was like actually kind of brilliant. I think that was the way to go. And get the tokens off the market and go straight in as equity businesses. Uniswap Labs was, you know, they also like they didn't buy this for Uni token holders, right? This is a Uniswap Labs acquisition, and the Uniswap token is actually like ownership of the protocol, ownership of like these V2 and V3 smart contracts, kind of like switch. Their governance and you know, their BSL license, yeah. So I think kind of people just not just generally about. I think tokens are great for some instances, but just as kind of like, I think everybody is like seeing them as like out there. Their perception is that it's like proto equity, and that's wrong. That's completely wrong. It should be what we're seeing. We're seeing tokens that should be ownership of things that are literally on chain, not, you know, kind of this like not this kind of like shadow equity. That's insane.
That's interesting. Okay, so to clarify, it's true that that's at some point. Tokens did become like seen as equity, as a way to get kind of a share of a crypto project, because of like the governance power that they have, right? It's like this expectation that at some point token holders can vote to get some sort of dividend and like part of revenue, and the fact that you can kind of participate in governance makes token holders have some sort of right to the project. So in kind of those ways, it does make them look like stock. But the distinction you're making is that the thing that tokens should control it's not kind of the entire project. Like in the case of Uniswap, it's obviously just not Uniswap Labs, like the company. It's actually, Uniswap, the protocol, like the whatever kind of revenue and liquidity that's on chain. Like that's the thing that's directly linked to the token, nothing else. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that their equity is really where all the value lies in any of these companies. It's kind of like whatever is out there in the zeitgeist today for Uni that's what the Uni token is for. It's like the fee switch and BSL license and governance. But like Uni is going to make more hits, right? Like they're going to make V4 or V3.1 or whatever, right? And that, I think that's the value, is like the talent in the team and the management, because protocols can be released every day. I mean, I think Sushi did the same thing, right? It's just rolled out a copy of V2.
So even, to you, even if like all of Uniswap's activity happens on chain, to you, the equity, like Uniswap equity, is where the value is because the team is what's valuable. Yeah, in the case of Uniswap, especially so. in Web3 where everything is open source, and well, in the case of Uniswap, like you're not allowed to just fork it anymore, and they have this business license, but like in most cases, like stuff is open source and you can just copy it. So the team, like the actual talent, becomes even more important.
I think for Sushi, the power was the team as well, right? It was the team behind it, and because initially it was just this like V2 fork, and then it kind of like evolved as like the team was hyper talented and focused on delivering kind of a bunch of different verticals in the DeFi stack, and for another instance is like Yearn, right? Like Yearn, there are a million Yearn forks, but Yearn, the team, is what's valuable, not the protocol.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. So how do you think, like what's next? Like how do you think this space will evolve? Like what's the future hold for tokens? Do you think they'll become valued less as this becomes more apparent, or maybe there's a change in regulation where tokens do become more like equity? I don't know. Like where do you think like DAOs as a model are going?
Yeah, I would love to see some regulation passed that allowed tokens to be equity. I think it's very unlikely, but that would be the ideal scenario. I think that's what everybody's hoping for. So long, kind of this pipeline, and I saw this actually the opposite way for a long time, but like so long, I'll say this pipeline of kind of like VC to IPO has been like, we only allow sophisticated investors, right? And these sophisticated investors, qualifications for being a sophisticated investor are you're rich,
right?
And they kind of have controlled and extracted the value from this like pipeline to like kind of like until acquisition or IPO. And I always thought that was just a value extraction, but actually like now that I'm kind of like in this system, I see, and like having seen tokens, it's like actually it's value extraction, but it's also accountability, right? So tokens, a lot of these teams kind of like release tokens and then they're gone, right? Like there are founders of projects that are gone in 6 months because they've already kind of like exited their position by, minting tokens and having them on the open market. It's like, I think that this is like, there's like a lack of accountability when it comes to tokens, and there's this very firm accountability when it comes to equity. So I think most of the people, and I think this, let me get back, I think the question is like, how do we evolve in the space? I think like the way that we evolve is that we have these really great set of ethos in DeFi, which is like kind of, somewhat free and open source, allowing kind of like other people to use the platforms, trying to help people who are don't have access to sophisticated financial tools. I think those are great like ethos that the space carries forward, regardless of whether they're equity companies or token companies. And I think most everybody who is talented is kind of going to migrate into like an equity only company.
So, okay. So to you, like, where is there space for tokens? Like, when should a project have a token?
Totally. Yeah, I think that there are definitely space for tokens. I think like it's like a fundamental building block in this space as well, right? Like, and so I think like when we saw the ICO boom in 2017, we saw a lot of like these like utility tokens that were really forced. And governance tokens was like the next step, I think, in terms of like value of something. Governance tokens had this like kind of real value to them, whereas like the utility tokens were kind of not making a whole lot of sense in the system. And so I think maybe the next step. I think I'm sorry. The tokens definitely have a place, and so we use them as like kind of an atom to build new things, and not necessarily governance tokens specifically. Like for instance, on Astaria, we have an ERC 2040. We have an ERC 4626, which is an ERC 20 compatible vault token that was developed by, I forget if it was Faye or Rari, one of the two.
Okay.
And this is we'll use this kind of like the way you might use an integer or a float or a char in any software development. We kind of use it as like a building block. I don't know that there's a huge future for governance tokens. I think people will still use them. I think there will be a hybrid model that infers like ownership over a thing that's on chain that you can actually govern, like say interest rates or more token issuance or fee switches, that sort of stuff. And that's where the token model really makes sense. I think governance over a thing that we can control.
Makes sense. Can you explain a bit more what you meant about using tokens as a building block?
Yeah, sure. I think at the most fundamental level, most everything on chain is going to be a token of some sort. ERC 20 or ERC 721, because it's kind of this. It's like a almost like a memory pointer, and so we call them like the DeFi primitives because we use them like we would primitives in a programming language. This is my 2 cents. I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like we're going to be swapping. Like, we're going to be swapping tokens, right? If we're swapping, we're not going to be swapping. Differing standards. That was like one really clear thing that they did in Ethereum really early. I mean, ERC 20, right? It's like the 20th EIP was like to write a standard for the token interface, so we didn't wind up with like a billion different token types. I mean, we still have quite a few, but like they all kind of have to conform to the base set of ERC 20. Otherwise, they're irrelevant, right?
Right. So you mean like tokens, are useful as assets, as kind of financial assets, and they can be fungible. They can be non-fungible, like NFTs. Maybe they can represent, I don't know, like things in the physical world. Do you think?
I would love that. I can't wait for that to happen, actually. When ownership on chain is respected in the real world.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine that your mortgage is like in ERC 721? Mm-hmm. I saw somebody actually get blown up on this for on a podcast for saying
really?
that idea. Yeah. They were like, respecting, like, the thing that has to change is the laws, right? If you want,
I saw that.
Yeah.
Mark Andreessen was saying that, like property should be traded on chain, and the guy was like, but how do you enforce that, that mortgage is paid if like all you have is an NFT?
Right.
Like, do you go to the bank and be like, hey, like I own this house, but
Yeah, the same way that I do it with the piece of paper. Exactly
right.
the same way, right? I go,
yeah.
Hey, I own this piece of paper that says I own that house. Can you get them out, please? And they go, they won't leave. Okay, let's call the sheriff. Like, that's
right.
it, right? It's like, it's not like rocket science. We just need, off chain to respect, what's going on chain. I know Materium was like focused on that early on. And I know there are people who are like built kind of like you have to like set up like a trust or something. And then the trust has to respect the token on chain. But yes, I love real world assets being on chain. That's like getting a mortgage is like that, like I go to Aave and I get a mortgage, or I go to Astaria and I get a mortgage, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Maker is already kind of doing that with what's this project? With a C. I don't know. I can't believe I'm blanking on it. Do you know what I mean?
I've heard about it, but I don't know any details. I'd heard that they were doing something with like kind of like TradFi stuff. Like Compound has their what do they have? They have like some sort of like business arm that does like they'll have like a compound savings rate kind of thing. If you're like a high net worth individual, you can get, I think, like 5 or 8% or something steady. And then there's like Maple, and they're kind of like doing some of this like real world money, but moving an asset. That's interesting, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's been kind of like Tesla used Maker to close out like an actual loan to buy stuff like in the real world. So I don't know, like these bridges are starting to happen. I don't think it's so far-fetched. I think it's actually kind of the direction that hopefully that DeFi is going. I believe it is going that way. Oh, and the company Centrifuge that's putting kind of using Maker to add kind of tokens that are linked to real world assets as collateral. So I think they do like invoices.
So it's like I can buy like somebody's I could buy someone's like receivables or something.
Yeah, stuff like that. When you shop for plane tickets, you probably use Kayak, Expedia, or Google Flights. So why would you limit yourself to just one exchange when you trade crypto? To make sure you're getting the best possible price, you should use a DEX aggregator like Matcha. Matcha routes your orders across all the various DeFi exchanges on Ethereum, Polygon, Avalanche, BSC, Phantom, Celo, and Optimism to provide the best possible prices without taking any commissions. Matcha also has integrated fiat on-ramps, so you can buy directly with your credit or debit card, and uses smart order routing that splits your order across multiple liquidity sources. A major discussion in DAO governance has revolved around token holder concentration. What we see now in Web3 is reminiscent of traditional models where VCs owned IPO pipelines and private equity. A large share of tokens in Web3 are held by VCs. Joseph discusses the current one token, one vote model and shares alternative governance systems.
It's difficult to understand what the alternative might be to one token, one vote, right? It's like, Might we have, delegations? Delegation makes more sense, I think. But it's still technically, one token, one vote, because I'm delegating to this. I mean, like, that's just like representative democracy, right? We do that basically everywhere. And so that's probably a decent system. Having every single person get warmed up every single time there's an issue. This is like the other thing is like the voting fatigue is very much real for DAOs. Is like if we're voting, like I have to keep up with this thing, like, and then I have to stay informed of the issue, and then it also has to be something that falls into my domain of expertise for me to like decide whether it is a good idea or it's a bad idea. I think those are like really difficult things to do, and representative democracies are really good at that, because that's kind of like this. But we joked about protocol politicians like a while ago in the Ethereum ecosystem, but I think that's what people are becoming, and I think it's a net positive that we have kind of like representative democracies who are paying attention to the issues and casting their votes on a basis of something that's inside their domain of expertise.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about something that can tie your wallet to your identity? So it's like one person, one vote. Do you think we'll ever get there?
Yeah, this is kind of like around civil defense kind of stuff, right? I can look into the orb and it will read my eyeball and it will tell me that I am the unique individual. What is it? Santi series proof of life?
Democracy Earth.
Proof of human, something like that. What is it?
Yeah, proof of humanity.
Yeah, proof of humanity. There we go. Okay, so like, I mean, that's another like kind of noble goal. But should it be one person, one vote too? Right? Like I have a lot more at stake, saying that maybe I own 20% of the token supply of something. That would be a conversation to be had, because if it's one person, one vote, then that's a bit weird. I think it might be. Especially if they have less at stake, that might be part of the problem with DAOs. Is people who have very little at stake, kind of like spending a lot of their time inputting into the meta layers of the DAO, which is like the Discord and then like the forums. And they're not necessarily like have much at stake other than being able to write stuff.
Okay, so that would be an argument for one token, one vote. I mean, the fact is that token holders who have more tokens are more involved in the protocol. They're probably team members, and so there's an argument there that, well, maybe they should have a bigger say.
Well, it's like in my interactions in DAOs, the people who are normally the large token holders, they aren't necessarily the teams. The teams generally aren't doing very well, which is another problem with DAOs. But the large token holders are definitely consummate professionals. They're always like, venture firms, prop shops, hedge funds, etc. And working with them was always great. Actually, I really enjoyed that, and they were, like a real pleasure to work with. And then the flip side is like, the smaller token holders were very often like a misery to work with. They're just, complaining about, the token price or whatever. And you're just, I don't have any control over that. I could just build products. That's all I can do.
Devs do something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's okay. So to you, like, you don't think, is it problematic that VCs have, so much power over voting? I see your point. Like, they are kind of, smart money is kind of what it's called, right? Like they know what they're doing. Like, they're in the space. Like they can make an informed decision when they come to the vote. But there's just like this suspicion against them because they just like end up owning so much of what's supposed to be like a decentralized ecosystem.
Totally. And things that aren't fair launch, it happens that way, right? Mm-hmm. It's like they have the super secret, double secret like token sale that happens, as like, maybe like equity or whatever. And then they're large holders. I think that's a huge fucking problem, actually. Oh, sorry. Can I curse here?
Yeah, that's fine. My bad. It's okay.
I think that's a huge problem, actually. They're having like an outsized portion, and we're able to participate when nobody else could participate. Like things that are fair launch, like Yearn or Sushi or whatever, are less problematic in that regard. Because like anybody who had bought up a bunch of like tokens off the market had done it at the market rate, and they kind of had like a long-term, belief that the project was going to be successful. So that's like I don't see it as a problem on fair launch stuff. But yeah, these like underhanded token deals, I'm not crazy about.
It's like as long as they were able to participate in the same condition that everyone else was, then it's fine.
Yeah, but they're also like earlier too, and so they are taking a risk in that regard. But yeah, the portions are like the proportions are crazy out there.
We're coming to the end of the hour, and I really want to get your own story in the podcast, because I think it's so interesting, kind of how you came to crypto. And so, there's kind of this question that I ask a lot of my guests, like, how are you defiant? And I think, maybe we can tie that to your own story.
Oh, yeah, totally. I was kind of like a serial fuck up. I think I still am, actually. But like, left high school kind of like not any, like, not somebody deemed like not for college kind of. I kind of like fail through like every job that I'm in until I go into the military, and I go into the Air Force for like 4 years during the OEF and OIF, the Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, aptly named missions. After I, like, while I'm in, I start learning about, like, this is like Ron Paul was huge at this time. And I was like, end the Fed kind of stuff, and very much kind of in this like libertarian mindset. And then I graduate. Or graduate? No. Then I leave the service, and then I go to school for computer science and mathematics. Then once I graduate from that, I go to a bank, which is USAA, which is a bank that serves like veterans and their families. In terms of like the scale of like evil, they're like all the way over on like probably the good side as far as banks go. But it's it's still a bank, right? I learned like a lot about like money movement, and kind of while I was in school, I had gotten involved in like Bitcoin as well, and then like now I'm involved in like Dogecoin, and kind of like figuring out what the space is like. Then kind of Ethereum pops up, and I'm like completely like, it's not even relevant to me, because it's, I was thinking of, this is that time that was like, I want to say like 2014, that like 2015, where all these like random coins are popping up. Ethereum pops up. Yeah, it's 2015, of course, right? And Ethereum pops up. I'm like, whatever, dude. Like, I'm not that interested. Because I'm over here, I have like, Dogecoin and like some other random like Mastercoin or something. And then, enough time elapses. In fact, I worked with Hudson Jameson at the bank there.
Interesting.
Yeah. Actually, Johnny Ray, I worked with at the bank from Element Phi, like CTO of Element Phi, and Hudson Jameson I worked with at the bank as well. Like something in the water at USAA at that time.
Wow.
Yeah. And so as I finally like come around to understanding Ethereum, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, this is like going to change everything, especially like, you talk about like the money use case of Bitcoin. That's great. But like the entire financial system, that's a lot bigger, like addressable market. And we do some stuff with the bank and try and get them to do like subrogation on chain. And subrogation is like the process of cost recovery after an insurance incident.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, yeah, that's the insurance term. It just means getting your money back from all the peoples. And then like I leave to do like ETH2 core development because I like cornered Joe Lubin at South by Southwest when they had like a booth there, and I corner him and I make him look at the thing I built at ETH Denver, and he like didn't call security, which was cool. And he just like had a call with me and Johnny, who helped build it, and another friend, and then he hired us as ETH2 core developers, and that's how we came into this. But I still kind of have that same mindset. I'm like very much libertarian in a lot of my beliefs. I think I've like tapered some of them after working in like DAOs and stuff and understanding like the nature of human beings and how public goods work. But generally, yeah, like I think banks are done. I think this is like the last, once we have a credit card system that plugs right into my wallet, I think banks are over. Like, what good are banks for? I can't think of one.
I just think, like your whole trajectory is amazing. You have, this thread where you go through it, and you really, like you said, you started out kind of like going from job to job. You said kind of you were like you didn't have enough money to eat, like you didn't
totally.
like like it says you kind of didn't even have enough kind of to buy yourself a belt when your pants didn't fit because you weren't eating. It's just like a very extreme situation, and to go from that to becoming the CTO of one of the most important projects in DeFi, it's I think it's amazing.
Yeah, it is crazy when I look back. But yeah, like banks, the banks are predatory. They're predatory and they hurt people. I think like. I can't think of a good reason to use one, and as long as I have blockchain, I won't. I had I was just lucky, I think, just lucky.
Well, maybe I make sense. I guess like it was a great call to like go into computer science and and then like going up to Joe Lubin.
Yeah, no filter. Yeah, I like choosing computer science choosing mathematics and computer science. I was like, computer science is gonna pay well. I was like, but what's hard? I fucking hate math. Actually, I still hate math. But I did it because it was hard, I guess. And kind of like one of my superpowers is throwing my hat over the wall. There's like this idea of committing yourself to something, like throwing your hat over the wall, and like you have to climb the wall to go get your hat. And so like pre-committing yourself to something, and then you either the outcome is either kind of embarrassment or success. And if you hate embarrassment as much as I do, very often it will be success.
Nice. I like that. No, such an inspiring story. And then, I guess kind of to wrap up, tying kind of your views on how like banks are done for, and just like what we've been talking about, DAOs, like how does just like the future kind of financial industry look to you? Like, is it everything is on chain, but it's still managed by mostly just like traditionally structured companies? Like, how does that work?
Man, yeah, this is a great question. Like, what I really want to see, and I think is possible, is so many people in the world are boxed out from participating in finance. And that is almost entirely not just, money, but kind of crony capitalism ideas that, box people out, through regulation. And what I want to see is the average people, the people like, I was able to, if they have money to save, that they can put it into like an investment vehicle, that sort of financial freedom is democratized to everyone. Mm-hmm. You see that in like Robinhood and stuff, but like I think that DeFi is kind of like the end solution, and I just want to see that.
I love it. Joseph, this was fascinating. I really appreciate you taking the time. Love the conversation, really thought-provoking. So, thanks again for coming on the podcast.